Government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome on in to another podcast by George. Well, you got a big moment for me. I've got a member of CODEPINK on the podcast by George live line. I'm a huge fan. I like everything about that organization. I like their perspective and what they're doing and what they're trying to get done as far as the war machine here in the United States is concerned. And I just saw an article that I wanted to reference, and I got kind of lucky. I got the author to come on with us, and it couldn't be more appropriate than what we've been talking about. You know, the big three on Podcast by George is climate, war, and healthcare, and they're all intersecting, and that's what our conversation is going to be about today. I mean, the climate and the war machine are really deep linked, and the problem with the environment and with the climate is right at the doorstep of the Pentagon. And joining us on the Podcast by George live line today is Marcy Winograd of Progressive Democrats of America. She served as the 2020 DNC delegate for Bernie Sanders and co-founded the Progressive Caucus of the California Democratic Party. Coordinator of CODEPINK Congress, Marcy spearheads Capitol Hill calling parties to mobilize co-sponsors and votes for peace and foreign policy legislation. Marcy, welcome to a podcast by George.
Well, thank you, George. It's a great honor to be with you today to talk about climate and militarism, a conversation long overdue in terms of our national discussion.
Yeah, and it's going to come to the forefront here, I think, much sooner than later because of this climate situation that I mentioned at the onset. Marcy, I got to step back just a second. I almost laugh when I introduce you as this progressive, you know, and a lot of my liberal Democratic fans, oh my God, they're having a progressive on. Oh, that's scary stuff. And I tell people all the time, what are considered progressives today were mainline Democrats years ago. I mean, honest to God, Dwight Eisenhower, one of the first real critical people of the military-industrial complex, he would be considered a Democrat today, I think. I mean, progressives are not as far left as a lot of people think.
Yeah, I agree. And, people call others moderates. It's not moderate to push for a record high military budget, for nuclear rearmament, for underfunding of education and healthcare. That's not moderate. That's reactionary, right? We have a Republican Party that's been captured by neo-fascists and Democrats who are varied, shall we say. We have the Congressional Progressive Caucus, 94 plus members, and we need to strengthen that caucus even more.
Yeah, and they need to get mobilized. They need to take action. I see, Marcy, that we're already kindred spirits. You can tell. I tell people on the podcast all the time, Marcy, that the Democratic Party began moving right in 1980, basically, when they lost the Reagan Democrats, and they've been chasing those folks ever since, and the party has just moved further right, and it's pushed the Republicans on the crazy train until it's docked right now at the QAnon station. I mean, that's what's happened in America. Well, let me get to this outstanding article that Marcy wrote. I'm going to share the screen here, bring this up. It always takes a little bit of time to bring these things on. And it reads, "The Pentagon is killing us and the planet. Climate activists demand COP26 reduce military carbon emissions." And there's Marcy. It says the dog days of summer are upon us, and the record high temperatures killing hundreds in the Pacific Northwest and bringing 118-degree heat to Siberia serve as a harbinger of even hotter, more dangerous days unless we address the elephant in the room, the Pentagon. As the largest institutional consumer of oil and therefore the largest single U.S. emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. Man, that's critical. GHGs. The Pentagon must reduce its carbon footprint of wars and weapons productions, as well as its boot print, including tens of thousands of troops deployed worldwide at 800 overseas military bases and one under construction on Okinawa. And I know that you're aware of this also, Marcy, that base in Okinawa, they've got some serious protests going on there. The Japanese people do not want that thing located there. Is that going to happen?
It looks like it is, unless somehow we can mobilize people both in this country and in Japan outside of Okinawa to stop it. The construction of that base is tearing up the ocean, island of Okinawa, and the people there are, they're so sad and outraged at the loss of precious marine life. Why? To build runways for the F-35. Another culprit, carbon culprit. So that's another struggle. Part of the overall struggle to reduce militarism in the United States and elsewhere too.
Well, and I wanted to let me go back to this article now because this is really critical. It says to avoid the worst of the climate crisis, President Biden, Congress, and the public can reject an interventionist foreign policy fueled by the drive for full spectrum dominance of the air, land, sea, and space. Otherwise, we brace ourselves for ever rising sea levels, extreme weather, drought, famine, all of which, according to the World Bank, could result in 143 million climate refugees by 2050. Okay, so that is the part that I wanted to get in there because that comes off our conversation just yesterday with Dr. Jerry Schnoor with this IPCC report coming out of the United Nations. This climate situation is going to get very dire, and you read it and you think, oh my God, I didn't realize it was this bad, but I guess there's nothing we can do, Marcy. Yeah, there are things we can do, and President Biden can do some things himself.
Unilaterally, that's right. He could sign an executive order to require the Pentagon and the Department of Energy, which oversees the production of nuclear weapons, to report, monitor, reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And let's have a conversation that's open and public and transparent about the role of the US military in warming the planet. Because that conversation has been missing. That conversation has been silenced. The United States under Dick Cheney went to bat to make sure that the Kyoto Protocol, which we never ratified, did not include a requirement for the United States to report military greenhouse gas emissions. The Paris Agreement isn't much better. It says something to the effect of countries can report it, but they don't have to. So the Pentagon has decided not to report it. And when they do report their greenhouse gas emissions, it's usually in the aggregate. So you have no idea, what is the greenhouse gas price of all of these troops, thousands and thousands of troops being flown all over the world, or new weapon systems, right? And with so much being contracted out to private military contractors, there's even less transparency. So I'm working not only with CODEPINK and Progressive Democrats of America, but also with Veterans for Peace. We have a climate militarism working group, and we are looking forward to Congresswoman Barbara Lee introducing a resolution to address this issue and say, hey, it's time that the Pentagon report and reduce its military greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, we're in the same hymnal. Marcy's singing my song. I'm going to bring this up on screen again. I know that she's seen maps like this many times, but this is what we're talking about here. This is a map showing the military installations. These big ones here are the ones where we have bunches. Germany, 148. United Kingdom, 58. Italy's got 32. There's India with 36. And I look at a map like, well, of course, in Europe that's NATO. I mean, that's what that's all about. And there's big business associated with this. We are the world's biggest exporter of military weaponry. Obviously, they're probably the primary employer in the United States and provider of benefits to so many Americans, the military industrial complex. And the other map that I like to show, I'm not going to be able to bring it up here, I don't think. Yeah, here it is. This is Iran, and I just had somebody on the podcast that was talking about our need to protect ourselves from Iran and aggressors to the United States. These are military bases, Marcy, surrounding the country of Iran, and our aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, there in the Gulf. And as you look to the west here, just where my cursor's at, over here to the further part of the map on the west side is Libya. And of course, that was one of the big intervention opportunities the United States had, and it's called the Libya solution. And we can't understand why these countries around the world don't want to disarm, get rid of their nuclear weapons programs, and fall in line with us. Well, Libya tried that, and Muammar Gaddafi was last seen on video being killed by a gang as he was pulled out of a sewer pipe. So that's the kind of interventionist policy the United States has implemented around the world. And these are just a couple of maps that show what's going on. Marcy, your article references the fact there are 800 of these military bases around the globe.
Yes, some are larger than others, but we are absolutely occupying much of the globe. And this has got to be downsized, this overseas presence, because not only do a lot of countries the people don't want us there, but the climate cost is tremendous. And I'm hopeful that this will happen sooner or later, because as you mentioned, we are running out of time. It's a climate crisis. Is it going to be a climate catastrophe? That's the question. We can, at this moment, at this juncture in history, make it less severe. We can keep it hopefully below 2 degrees Celsius. I mean, that's what's called for in the agreement that John Kerry, our climate envoy, signed with China. That's what's called for in the Paris Accord. I think it's even 1.5 in the Paris Accord, Paris Agreement. So how are we going to get there? If we won't talk about the Pentagon's overreach, how are we going to get there? We have to talk about it. And so my call is to other countries, to the leaders of other countries, as well as our own country, to put this on the table. We have the 26th UN Climate Conference coming up in November in Glasgow, Scotland. The COP26, COP stands for COP, Conference of the Parties, 26th UN Climate Agreement. We want militarism at the center of the table to be talked about. We don't want these other countries to let the United States off the hook. And we in the United States have to push to ensure that this is mandated, that this is a requirement for the 197 countries expected to participate. At CODEPINK, at Roots Action, at World Beyond War, at Veterans for Peace, we have petitions saying, sign up with us and demand that the Pentagon reduce, report, and make the reduction of military greenhouse gas emissions part of the next climate agreement in Glasgow, Scotland. And we're expecting tens of thousands of protesters to be on the street in Glasgow during this conference, which is November 1st through the 12th.
And I'll run some lower thirds, some supers, chirons, I don't know what they want, at the bottom of the screen here with some website addresses where folks can sign petitions, get involved, follow CODEPINK, watch for Marcy's writings so that people can become more informed about this. And I was glad to hear you mention China because, the elephant in the room, as your article mentions, is the Pentagon, but there's a couple of other mastodons out there, and it's the United States and China. And instead of ramping up this Cold War and trading insults and doing a bunch of saber rattling, these two huge concerns need to get together on climate, particularly, and demilitarize.
Yes. So on the one hand, we see this agreement that John Kerry, our climate envoy, signed with the leaders of China, saying that we must strengthen the Paris Agreement, that we must reach carbon neutrality sooner rather than later. And on the other hand, you have these warmongers in the White House, in Congress, who are doing all the saber rattling. And a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that, under Chuck Schumer, his bill, the Innovation Act of 2021, calls not only for an investment of $250 billion in high tech to compete with China on microchips and other things, but also lots of money, billions of dollars, to send more missiles to the South China Sea, to declare Taiwan a U.S. national urgent priority, a national urgent priority. And this is very frightening. It's not only in the Innovation Act that passed the Senate, it's also in the Eagle Act in the House, Gregory Meeks. And we have to be mindful of the fact that, as Daniel Ellsberg pointed out recently when he released classified documents that he had Xeroxed, 50 years ago, the Pentagon, the Air Force, was all set to launch a first nuclear strike against China in 1958 over the Taiwan Strait. And Ellsberg said, he didn't put it past anyone in the current administration to not plan for this as well. So we have to be louder. We have to educate people and build awareness and say, stop, this is a train wreck. We don't have to be on this track.
Yeah, it is a train wreck. And you'll love the subtitle for my show. Last year in particular, Marcy, I was telling everybody we live in a 2020 world. In 20 minutes, we could be dead from an accidental nuclear strike. Doesn't make any difference if it's well-intentioned or accidental. 20 minutes, it's game over, folks. And the other thing is we could be dead in 20 years, I said last year, because of the climate. Now the IPCC scientists are telling us that it might even be sooner than that. So that's the 2020 world that we reside in. These things they're trains coming down the track at each other, and we're right in the middle of the track, folks. I got to mention another thing, too, I wanted to bring up here, because this is right in your world, Marcy. I started off talking about this train of the crazy train that the Republicans are on, and QAnon and all that. So I don't spend a lot of time on my podcast criticizing or cajoling those folks. That's not going to do any good. That's not going to happen. If we're going to have any success, particularly with the limited time that we have available, it's with this Democratic Party. But the Democrats have been voting to increase military spending by a lot, by billions, and under Donald Trump. And your article points out that it's not only here on this planet, it's up in space.
Absolutely. They want full spectrum dominance. I live about 65 miles from Vandenberg. It's no longer called Vandenberg Air Force Base. It's called Vandenberg Space Force Base. And they expect to test the ground-based strategic deterrent there, the GBSD. That's a new nuclear weapon, a new intercontinental ballistic missile. They're going to construct, or they plan to, not at Vandenberg, but at different sites around the country, 600 new missiles to replace those in silos and in Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, those places. And when you step back, you say, wait a minute, and by you, I mean President Biden, I mean the more reactionary Democrats in Congress, I mean the Republican Party, almost
sure
all of it. You're telling us that we have to protect ourselves from China, from Russia, from an enemy over there. The enemy, the two existential threats, which you mentioned, are facing us right now. And that is nuclear rearmament, which we are deeply engaged in, and the climate crisis. So let's meet those, right? Let's address those, because real dangers. And fortunately, we have a Congressional Progressive Caucus with 94 members in the House, and they're pushing back on increased militarism. Whether they can be successful in ensuring that amendments to the budget resolution that call for increased militarism are defeated, we shall see. But I am glad to say that recently, within the last few days, the Senate voted down an amendment to add another $50 billion to the already record high proposed military budget. Mm-hmm. So that's good news, but we have a lot more on our plates, right? To make sure that we head in a different direction. There is some talk, and recently I coordinate, as you mentioned, CODEPINK Congress, and on Tuesdays, we'll be starting up again in September 7th. We have calling parties and guests who come on and talk about foreign policy and how to promote a more progressive foreign policy and reduce militarization in the United States. And we were honored to have Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal from Washington. She's chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, come on. And she said, her response was, we're fighting for progressive programs within the budget resolution, the reconciliation process. In other words, tuition-free college, preschool for everybody, lowering the age of eligibility for Medicare. But she said that fighting the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, defeating that, which is for the military budget, an outline for the military budget, is so very difficult because the Congressional Progressive Caucus, by and large, she said, opposes the NDAA, and they don't have votes to deliver on that. And so the Democrats then go to the Republicans, Chuck Schumer, the chairs of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the House Armed Services Committee. They will then go to Republicans to try to get enough votes for this bloated, obscene military budget. So given that, you have to say, okay, what's our game plan? How do we challenge this successfully? And one question that I've raised, and this is controversial within the anti-war movement, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, George, but if you cannot defeat these obscene military budgets, is there a way to divert the money in that budget toward human needs, toward green infrastructure, toward mitigating the climate crisis? Under FDR, we had the Civilian Conservation Corps. They planted 3 billion trees, right? Why can't we do something like that again?
Yeah. And that's, from a climate perspective, exactly what needs to be done as far as carbon capture is concerned. But here's what I would say. And after seeing this IPCC coverage, the report that came out yesterday, I'm thinking time's up. We don't have time for the political logistics any longer. For Pramila Jayapal and the Progressive Caucus, here's what I would say. You guys need to dig in with a reconciliation package as an example. That kook Joe Manchin is proving it over there on the Democratic side in the Senate. The margins are so narrow in the House and in the Senate for Republicans and Democrats that if you just say no mas, we're not going to pass anything until we do this. Stop it right now, because we don't have any time left. I mean, stop the votes, stop the Congress, basically. They can do it if they just use the leverage that they have and join together and say job number one is climate. And this Pentagon thing in your article is how we address it first and foremost, because I had some people contact me after the podcast aired, and my wife was running around with her hair on fire after she saw it, and said, God, we need to put solar panels on the house. We need to get an electric car. Yeah, that stuff's all well and good. We do need to do that, and God love everybody for wanting to do something themselves. But the thing that we can do first and foremost as Americans, as politicians, as the president, is to get rid of some of these military bases and some of this defense pollution and gas burning that's going on around the globe. So that's my 2 cents, and probably more than you wanted to hear. Yeah.
I mean, you take a look at some of these long-range fighter jets that are produced by Boeing, and they burn up as much fuel in 1 hour as the average car driver burns in 7 years. You look at the F-35, that is considered to be a miserable failure by those in the military itself, and by the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith, who says, oh, pouring more money into the F-35 is like pouring it into a rat hole. And yet that, Biden has proposed that we contribute is not the right word, subsidize another 85, I believe, F-35s in this next military budget. They're capable of carrying both conventional and nuclear weapons. So it's such a frightening investment, right? This is the path that we are on. And I find, George, that our challenge is the underlying philosophy that paves the way for all of this, and that is this belief in U.S. exceptionalism. The belief that we must have full spectrum dominance. People don't understand this is ecocide, right?
Yeah, that's a good term for it.
And even in the environmental movement, we need to push. We need to push environmentalists to talk about militarism, because by and large, the environmental movement has not taken on the Pentagon. Maybe for whatever, maybe they feel that's not a winnable fight. I don't know, but it's a fight we have to have, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a two-headed monster. I mean, it's the defense issue, and it's climate, and now they're intersecting. And let's say you feel safe at night and you want to be protected and you believe in this foreign policy approach to the United States, but you're looking at this climate situation and you're going, oh my God, well, okay. Let's cut back on that military, folks, to save the planet. Marcy, we're out of time. I knew when we got two like minds like this going, it would happen. But I want to give you last word here, because I'm just delighted to have anybody with Code Pink come on the show, and particularly somebody that wrote such an outstanding article.
Well, thank you so much, George. Yes, I would urge those who are listening and watching to contact us at codepink.org. Get involved. We have a lot of different projects that address foreign policy, and we are sending a delegation to Glasgow, Scotland, provided that the COVID, Delta variant doesn't derail all of that. But we do plan to be there in the street with our banners. Do get involved. Join the Veterans for Peace Climate Militarism Group. Take a look at World Beyond War, Roots Action, Progressive Democrats of America. we're all on the same page. You know, we want to reduce this military budget. We want every member of Congress to join Barbara Lee and Mark Pocan's House Defense Spending Reduction Caucus to commit to reducing the military budget by at least 10%.
At least.
And we want everyone to sign our pledge at Code Pink to say, we are not, as a member of Congress, going to accept any money from the 5 top military contractors. Let's see. A quiz. Can I mention them all? General Dynamics, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman,
Raytheon.
and Raytheon.
There you go.
Yeah. No money from them.
I got to ask you real quickly while I've got you on here. If you look at the top 10 list of the defense contractors, and you just gave the top 5, Humana is on that list. Is that why is that? Is that because of insurance products provided to the military and TRICARE and all that, or do you have any idea what that's about?
It's a good question for our next show.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, because I just love it. Folks, that's Marcy Winograd of Code Pink, and you've seen the website addresses on the screen, so please contact, participate, be a part of this, because it's all on the line right now for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. Marcy, thanks again for coming on Podcast by George.
Thank you, George. Great to be with you.
Yeah, that's great. And folks, if you like Podcast by George, if you like perspectives like this, and I like to think that it's fact. I mean, this isn't bullshit. This isn't anything that's made up or fabricated. This is the real deal. Please go to podcastbygeorge.com. Select a platform where you'd like to follow us, either on YouTube or on Facebook for the videos. And then, of course, iTunes and Spotify and all the places where audio podcasts are heard. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.